Ambassador Kethra had spent 3 long years studying humans, and she thought she understood them well enough to predict their behavior in most situations. But nothing in all her research had prepared her for what she was about to witness aboard the refugee vessel called the Starlight Mercy. The ship was carrying survivors from a terrible attack on a border colony, and most of the passengers were Varelian families who had lost everything they owned and many people they loved. And the cubs among them were the most affected of all, sitting in silence with empty eyes that seemed to look at nothing. Kethra herself was a tall creature with 4 arms and compound eyes that could see in multiple spectrums of light. And her people were known throughout the galaxy for their logical minds and their ability to solve complex problems. But the problem of these traumatized children seemed beyond even Varelian wisdom to solve when the human relief worker named Marcus Chen was assigned to help manage the youngling quarters. Kethra had gone directly to the ship captain to protest this decision with all the authority her position allowed her. "Captain Veth," she had said, standing in his office with her arms crossed in the Varelian gesture of formal disagreement. "I must object to this assignment in the strongest possible terms." The captain had looked at her with tired eyes and asked her to explain her concerns. "Humans are predators," Kethra had explained. "They have forward-facing eyes designed to track prey, and their evolutionary history is written in blood and violence. And I do not understand why we would place such a creature near frightened cubs who have already experienced so much terror." Captain Veth had listened patiently and then told her that Command had insisted on this assignment because humans excelled at something called crisis care, and he trusted that there must be good reasons for this reputation, even if neither of them fully understood what those reasons might be. Kethra had accepted this answer because she had no choice. But she made a private decision to observe this human closely and document everything he did so that she could report any problems. Immediately, Marcus Chen arrived the next morning, and Kethra watched him from a distance as he walked through the ship corridors toward the youngling quarters. And she was surprised by how ordinary he looked. He was neither tall nor short for a human, with brown skin and dark hair that was starting to show small touches of gray at the sides. And he carried a simple bag over one shoulder and wore the plain uniform of the Galactic Relief Corps. And there was nothing about him that suggested he was anything special at all. But when he reached the door to the youngling quarters and looked through the window at the cubs inside, something changed in his face, and Kethra saw an expression there that she could not easily identify or understand. The youngling quarters held about 30 cubs of various ages, but there were 3 in particular who had become a serious concern for the ship counselors. And these 3 were orphans whose parents had died in the attack, and they had not spoken a single word in the 12 days since the rescue. These 3 cubs had found a corner of the room and built themselves a kind of nest out of thermal blankets and cushions, and they refused to come out for any reason, not for food or water or bathing or medical examinations. And the Varelian counselors had tried everything they could think of to help them. They had tried logic, explaining to the cubs that they needed to eat and drink to stay healthy. They had tried gentle commands, using the voice of authority the Varelian cubs were trained from birth to obey. They had even tried mild sedatives, hoping that a good sleep would help the cubs feel better. But the cubs had fought against the medication with such terror that the counselors had stopped trying. Nothing had worked, and the cubs remained hidden under their blankets. 3 small lumps that trembled whenever anyone came too close when Marcus entered the room for the first time. All the other cubs looked up at him with curiosity and some fear, because humans were still rare in this part of the galaxy, and many of these young ones had never seen one before. But Marcus did not pay attention to the curious stares, and instead he walked directly to the corner where the 3 orphans were hiding. And Kethra felt her body tense as she watched from the doorway, ready to intervene if necessary. What the human did next confused her completely. He sat down on the floor, crossing his legs in front of him in a position that looked very uncomfortable. And he placed his bag beside him and did nothing else at all. He simply sat there, looking at the pile of blankets where the cubs were hidden, and his face was calm and patient. And he did not seem to be in any hurry to do anything after a few minutes. He spoke, and his translator device rendered his words in perfect Varelian. And Kethra heard him say in a soft and gentle voice, "I know you are in there, and that is okay. And you can stay hidden as long as you need." The blankets did not move, and there was no response from the cubs beneath them. Marcus nodded as if this was exactly what he had expected. And then he reached into his bag and pulled out a small book with colorful pictures on the cover. And he opened it and began to read out loud in a quiet voice, not to anyone in particular. Just reading as if he enjoyed the sound of the words. Kethra watched for an hour as the human did nothing but sit and read. And when the hour was over, he closed his book and stood up slowly and said to the blanket pile, "I will come back tomorrow, and you can still be hidden if you want to be. And that will be okay too." Then he left the room. And Kethra followed him into the corridor and demanded to know what he thought he was accomplishing with this approach. Marcus looked at her with those strange forward-facing eyes and smiled a small smile and said, "I am showing them that I am safe, Ambassador, and that takes time. And I am willing to give them all the time they need." Kethra did not understand this answer, but something about the way he said it made her decide to keep watching before she made her report. She had no idea that she was about to learn something that would change the way she thought about humans forever. 3 days passed aboard the Starlight Mercy, and during those 3 days, Marcus Chun returned to the youngling quarters every evening without fail. And each time he came, he brought something small with him as a gift for the 3 hidden cubs on. The first evening, he brought a cup of sweet grain drink, which was a favorite treat among Varelian children. And he set it down near the blanket pile and said in his gentle voice, "I brought something sweet for you, and you can drink it whenever you want. And I will not watch you if you prefer privacy." Then he moved to the other side of the room and sat down with his back to them and read his book until the evening meal bell rang. And when he left, he saw that the cup was empty, though he had not heard a single sound of movement on. The second evening, he brought a soft toy that he had asked the ship fabricator to make. And it was shaped like a small Varelian animal called a fluffkin that cubs often kept as pets. And the fabric was very soft, and the colors were bright and cheerful. He placed it near the blankets and said, "I thought you might like a friend to keep you company under there. And this little fluffkin told me it likes dark, cozy places and would be very happy to join you." Kethra watched from her usual spot in the doorway and thought this was a very strange thing to say because the toy was not alive and could not have told him anything at all. But she noticed that one of the blankets moved slightly, and a small paw reached out and pulled the toy underneath. And she heard a soft sound that might have been a whisper of thanks on the third evening. Marcus brought a holographic star projector, which was a small device that could fill a room with images of stars and planets and nebulae. And he set it up in the corner and turned it on. And suddenly, the ceiling above the blanket pile was covered in beautiful swirling colors and tiny points of light. "I thought you might like to see the stars," he said. "And these are the stars from my home system. And when I was small and scared, I used to look at them and feel better. And maybe they can help you feel better too." He did not seem to expect an answer, and he sat down in his usual spot and read his book while the stars slowly rotated above them. Alcathrah found herself returning to observe every evening, and she told herself it was for scientific purposes, that she was gathering data on human behavior for her report. But deep inside she knew that she was also becoming genuinely curious about what would happen next. Human approach seemed so inefficient to her trained Varelian mind, and it went against everything she knew about child rearing and recovery from trauma Varelian methods emphasized. independence and self-regulation and direct communication. And if a Varelian cub was hiding under blankets, the proper response was to explain, logically, why hiding was not helpful and to guide the cub toward healthier behaviors through clear instruction. But Marcus did none of these things. And instead, he simply existed nearby, patient and present and asking nothing of the cubs at all. And Kethra could not understand how this could possibly work. On the fourth evening, something remarkable happened. Marcus had just finished setting down his daily gift, which was a small music box that played a gentle Varelian lullaby, when the smallest of the three cubs poked her snout out from beneath the blankets. Kethra felt her heart beat faster as she watched, and she held herself very still so that she would not frighten the little one back into hiding. The cub was a female named Yura, according to the ship records, and she was only 4 years old in Varelian terms, which made her equivalent to a human child of about 6. And her fur was a soft golden color that was now matted and dirty from her days of hiding her. Eyes were large and dark and filled with a fear that made Kethra feel a deep ache in her chest. Marcus did not react with excitement or celebration as Kethra expected he might, and instead he simply smiled a soft and warm smile and said in the gentlest voice Kethra had ever heard from any being, "Well, hello there, little treasure." Yura's ears flattened against her head in confusion, and she asked in a voice that cracked from days of not being used, "What is treasure?" Marcus seemed to think about this question carefully before he answered. And when he spoke, his words were simple and clear. "A treasure is something precious," he said. "Something valuable that makes your heart feel happy. And people search for treasures because finding them brings such joy. And when you find a treasure, you feel so lucky and so grateful." Yura stared at him with those big, dark eyes and seemed to be thinking very hard about what he had said. "I am a treasure?" she asked. And it was not quite a question and not quite a statement, but something in between. "You are a treasure," Marcus confirmed with a nod. "You are one of the most precious treasures I have ever found. And I am so happy that you let me see your beautiful face today." Yura did not respond to this, and after a moment she retreated back under the blankets. And Kethra felt a wave of disappointment wash over her because she had hoped for more, but Marcus did not seem disappointed at all. And he simply smiled and said to the blanket pile, "Thank you for coming out to say hello, and I will see you again tomorrow. And you will still be my treasure, even if you stay hidden." Then he picked up his book and read until the meal bell rang, just as he did every evening. The next evening, Yura poked her head out again, and the evening after that, she came out far enough to sit beside Marcus while he read, though she did not speak, and she scurried back under the blankets whenever anyone else came near. And on the 7th evening, something even more remarkable happened, because one of the other cubs, a male named Torin, who's older than Yura by about 2 years, also emerged from the blankets and asked Marcus to explain what he was reading. Kethra watched all of this unfold with growing amazement, and she began to understand that she was witnessing something that her Varelian training had never prepared her to comprehend. The human was not trying to fix the cubs or heal them or change their behavior through logic and instruction. He was simply showing them over and over again that they were valuable and precious and worth waiting for. And somehow this simple message was reaching them in a way that all the Varelian methods had failed to do. Kethra began to take more detailed notes, because she realized that what she was observing might be important, not just for these 3 cubs, but for the entire way the galaxy understood human beings and their strange but powerful ways of caring for the young and the broken. By the 2nd week aboard the Starlight Mercy, something extraordinary had begun to develop in the youngling quarters, and Kethra found herself spending more and more time watching Marcus Chun interact with the 3 orphan cubs. All 3 of them were now emerging from the blankets regularly, And they would sit with Marcus while he read stories or played simple games or just talked to them about nothing in particular. And their eyes were no longer empty, but filled with something that looked almost like hope. But the truly remarkable thing, the thing that made Kethra's compound eyes widen with astonishment when she first witnessed it, was what the cubs had started. Doing on their own, one evening she arrived at her usual observation spot in the doorway, and found Marcus standing in the middle of the room looking around with a confused expression on his face. And the three cubs were nowhere to be seen. Where could they be? Marcus said in a loud theatrical voice that seemed to fill the entire room. I came here to see my treasures, and they have disappeared. And I simply do not know what I will do without them. Kethra felt a moment of alarm, and she was about to ask what had happened when she noticed a blanket pile in the corner moving slightly, and she heard a sound coming from beneath it that she could not immediately identify. It was a soft chittering noise. And after a moment she realized with shock that it was the sound of Varelian cubs laughing. Oh no, Marcus continued in his dramatic voice, putting his hands on his hips and looking around the room. Where have my precious treasures gone? I have lost them completely, and my heart is breaking because I miss them so much. The chittering grew louder, and Kethra could see the blanket pile shaking now. And she understood suddenly that the cubs were not hiding from fear anymore. They were hiding because they wanted to be found. Marcus began to walk around the room, looking in places where the cubs obviously were not. Behind chairs and under tables and inside empty storage containers. And each time he checked the wrong place, he made a loud sound of disappointment. Not here, he would say, and not here either. Where could my treasures be hiding? The cubs were giggling so hard now that their hiding spot was obvious to anyone who cared to look. But Marcus seemed completely unable to notice them, and he walked right past the blanket pile several times while shaking his head sadly. I suppose my treasures are gone forever, he said with exaggerated sadness. And I will just have to sit here alone and be very, very sad. He sat down on the floor right next to the blanket pile and let out a long dramatic sigh. If only I could find my treasures, he said. I would give them the biggest hug in the whole galaxy, and I would tell them how much I love them and how happy they make me. The blanket pile exploded. All three cubs burst out from underneath the covers with shrieks of joy, and they threw themselves at Marcus with such force that he fell backward onto the floor. And suddenly, he was covered in small furry bodies that were all trying to hug him at the same time. You found us, little Yira shouted, a voice high and bright with happiness. You found us. We were hiding and you found us. I found you, Marcus said, and his voice was thick with an emotion that Kethra could not name. I found my treasures. You are right here, and I am so happy. I am the happiest person in the whole universe. He wrapped his arms around all three of them and held them close. And Kethra could see that there was water leaking from his eyes, which she knew was a human sign of strong emotion. My treasures, he kept saying over and over. My precious, precious treasures, I found you. I will always find you. No matter where you hide, I will always search for you, because you are worth finding. The cubs clung to him with their small claws digging into his uniform, and they were making a sound that was half laughing and half crying. And Torin, the oldest one, kept saying, again. We want to hide again. So Marcus let them go and closed his eyes and counted to 20, while the cubs scrambled to find new hiding places. And they were not very good at hiding because they kept giggling and moving around. But Marcus pretended not to notice any of this. When he opened his eyes, he began his search again, looking in all the wrong places and making dramatic sounds of confusion. And the cubs laughed and laughed until they could barely breathe. Kethra stood in the doorway and felt something strange happening inside her chest, a warmth that spread through her body and made her eyes sting in a way that she did not fully understand. She had never seen anything like this in all her years of studying. different species. The cubs were playing a game. But it was not just any game. It was a game about being lost and being found, about hiding and being discovered, about the fear of being alone and the joy of being wanted. And somehow through this simple game, Marcus was teaching them something that all the Varelian counselors, with all their training and all their methods, had failed to teach them. He was teaching them that they mattered. He was teaching them that someone would always come looking for them. He was teaching them that they were worth finding. Kethra watched as the game continued for over an hour, with the cubs hiding in increasingly creative places and Marcus finding them with increasing dramatic flair. And each time he discovered them, he would scoop them up and spin them around and call them his treasures. And the other cubs in the room had started watching too. And some of them were beginning to smile. And Kethra could see that they wanted to join in this wonderful game that seemed to make everyone so happy by the end of the evening. The three orphans were not the only ones hiding under blankets and waiting to be discovered. Half the cubs in the room were playing the game now. And Marcus was searching for treasures all over the room. And every time he found one, he made them feel like the most precious and valuable being in the entire galaxy. Kethra decided that she needed to speak with the ship counselor immediately, because she had witnessed something tonight that she believed could change the way the Varelian people thought about healing and about love and about the strange and wonderful creatures called humans. The next morning, Kethra requested a formal meeting with ship counselor Vethan, who was the lead Varelian child psychologist, aboard the Starlight Mercy and one of the most respected experts in trauma recovery in the entire sector. Vethan was an older Varelian with silver-streaked fur and tired eyes that had seen too many broken children. And she listened carefully as Kethra described everything she had observed over the past 2 weeks. "The cubs are speaking again," Kethra reported, her four hands gesturing with excitement as she spoke. "They are eating their meals without being forced. They are sleeping through the night without screaming from nightmares. And they are laughing, counselor. I heard them laughing with my own ears." Vethan's compound eyes shifted with an expression that Kethra could not quite read, and she was silent for a long moment before she responded. "I have been observing as well," Vethan said slowly. "And I have been studying human developmental psychology extensively since Mr. Chun arrived on this ship. And I believe I may understand what is happening, though it goes against much of what I was taught." Kethra leaned forward eagerly and asked Vethan to explain. "Their species has a behavior pattern called play," Vethan said. "And I know that we Varelians understand play as something cubs do to develop physical skills and learn social rules. But humans practice play in a very different way." She pulled up holographic data streams that floated in the air between them, showing neural scans and behavioral analyses and comparative studies from dozens of different species. "Human adults engage in what they call pretend play with their young," Vivian continued. "And this means they act out scenarios that serve no practical purpose at all. And they do this regularly and with great enthusiasm." Kethra thought about this and asked what kind of scenarios the humans pretended. "They pretend to lose things so they can find them again," Vethan said. "They pretend to be frightened so their cubs can be brave. They pretend cubs are hidden even when they are clearly visible. And they do all of this with complete sincerity, as if the pretending itself has value." "But why?" Kethra asked. "What is the purpose of such behavior if it accomplishes nothing practical?" Vethan's eyes softened, and she leaned back in her chair and seemed to consider her words very carefully before she spoke again. "Because it gives the young a sense of control," she said quietly. "And this is something I did not fully understand until I watched Mr. Chun with those 3 cubs." She gestured at the data streams, and they shifted to show brain activity patterns from the 3 orphan cubs. Comparing scans from their first day on the ship to scans from just yesterday. "Look at these readings," Vethan said. When the cubs first arrived, their brain activity showed patterns consistent with severe trauma, with the fear centers constantly active and the areas associated with trust and attachment nearly dormant. Kethra looked at the scans and could see clearly the difference between the two sets of readings. But now, Vethan continued, after just 2 weeks with this human, their brain activity has shifted dramatically, and the fear centers are calming and the trust centers are becoming active again. And this is happening faster than anything I have ever seen in my 40 years of practice. How is he doing it? Kethra, Vethan took a deep breath, and her next words seemed to carry great weight. The cubs choose when to hide, she said. And they choose when to be found, and they choose whether to play the game at all. And in a universe that has taken everything from them, their parents and their home and their sense of safety, this human has given them something back. She paused and looked directly at Kethra. He has given them agency, she said. He has given them the power to make choices and to have those choices respected. And he has wrapped all of this in joy and laughter, and the constant reassurance that they are precious and valuable and worth searching for. Kethra sat in silence as she processed this information. The word treasure is very significant, Vethan added, because humans assign emotional value through language in a way that we Varelians do not fully appreciate. And by calling the cubs treasures over and over again, Mr. Chun is telling them something important. What is he telling them? Kethra asked. He is telling them that they are precious, Vethan said, and that they are worth searching for, and that finding them is a cause for celebration and joy. And he is telling them this not once, but repeatedly, reliably, playfully, in a way that sinks deep into their hearts and becomes a truth they can believe in. Vethan stood up and walked to the window that looked out into space. And she stared at the stars for a long moment before she spoke again. Ambassador, she said, with her back still turned. I have practiced child psychology for 40 cycles, and I have studied at the finest institutions on our homeworld. And I have developed techniques and methods that have helped thousands of traumatized children. She turned to face Kethra, and her eyes were bright with an emotion that looked almost like tears. This human has achieved in 2 weeks what I could not achieve in months, she said. And I am formally requesting that he be assigned permanently to Refugee Youth Services. And I am also requesting permission to study his methods so that we can teach them to others. Kethra nodded slowly and said she would make sure this request reached the proper authorities. There is one more thing, Vethan said as Kethra stood to leave. I have been thinking about what makes humans different from us, and I believe I finally understand something important. What is that? Kethra asked. We Varelians believe that children should be raised to be strong and independent, Vethan said. And we believe that too much comfort and too much emotional expression will make them weak. But humans believe something very different. She paused and seemed to be searching for the right words. Humans believe that children become strong because they are loved, she said. And that independence grows from security, not from being left alone. And that the way to help a broken child heal is not to teach them to be tough, but to show them again and again that they are treasured. Kethra left the counselor's office with her mind spinning and her heart's full of new understanding. She had come to this ship believing that she knew everything important about humans, but she was beginning to realize that she had barely scratched the surface of what made them truly remarkable. 6 months had passed since the Starlight Mercy had first picked up the refugees from the border colony, and in that time everything had changed. Not just for the 3 orphan cubs, but for the entire way the Galactic Council thought about humans and their role in Interspecies Relations Ambassador Kethra now stood in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, facing delegates from over 200 different species, and she was about to deliver the most important report of her entire career. The chamber was vast and circular, with seats rising in tiers all around. and holographic translation devices floated above each delegate so that everyone could understand every word that was spoken. And the air hummed with the quiet murmur of beings from across the galaxy, waiting to hear what she had to say. "Distinguished delegates," Kethra began, her voice steady and clear. "I come before you today to share something that I believe will change the way we understand humanity and their place among the stars." She touched a control panel, and a large holographic image appeared in the center of the chamber, showing Marcus Chem surrounded by cubs of 12 different species in the recreation hall of the Starlight Mercy. He had been promoted 3 months ago to chief, coordinator of the new Interspecies Youth Recovery Program, a position that had been created specifically because of the remarkable results he had achieved. And now he worked with traumatized children from all across the galaxy. The image showed Varelian cubs tumbling over Krethix nestlings, and small human children playing alongside Sylvan younglings. And all of them were laughing and playing together as if the boundaries between species did not exist at all. "What you are seeing," Kethra said, "is the result of a single human using a technique that his species has practiced for thousands of years. A technique so simple that we more advanced civilizations overlooked it entirely." She touched the control panel again, and the image began to move, becoming a recording of an actual session from the previous week. In the recording, Marcus stood in the middle of the room and called out in a loud theatrical voice, "Ready or not, here I come. Where are my treasures?" The delegates watched as cubs of multiple species shrieked with delight and scrambled to hide themselves under blankets and cushions and behind furniture, their laughter filling the room with joy. "This is a game that human children have played for centuries," Kethra explained. "They call it hide and seek. And to most observers, it appears to be nothing more than simple entertainment." Marcus in the recording was now searching for the hidden cubs, making exaggerated sounds of confusion and disappointment each time he checked the wrong location. And the hidden children were giggling so hard that their hiding spots were obvious to anyone watching. "But look more closely," Kethra said, "and you will see something remarkable happening." She pointed to a section of the recording where a Varelian cub named Yira, now healthy and bright-eyed after months of recovery, discovered a Krethix nestling hiding under a blanket. The little Varelian did not simply walk past or ignore the nestling, but instead threw back the blanket and shouted with genuine excitement, "I found a treasure! I found one!" And then she hugged the Krethix nestling as if they were siblings, as if the differences between their species meant nothing at all. "The cubs have learned the game," Kethra said to the silent chamber. "But more importantly, they have learned the meaning behind it." She paused to let her words sink in before continuing. "Every being who plays this game, regardless of species, learns the same lesson, that they are a treasure worth searching for, that finding them brings joy, that their existence is cause for celebration." The recording continued to play, showing more and more cubs finding each other, each discovery accompanied by shouts of happiness and warm embraces, until the entire room was filled with children of different species, hugging and laughing together. "And when they find each other," Kethra said, "they pass on that same message. They tell each other through their actions that everyone is precious, everyone is valuable, everyone is worth finding." She touched the control panel one final time, and the image froze on Marcus, who was now covered in cubs of multiple species, all of them clinging to him and to each other. And he was laughing so hard that water was streaming down his face in the human expression of overwhelming emotion. "Distinguished delegates," Kethra said, turning to face the assembly directly, "we have spent centuries studying humans and trying to understand what makes them so successful at spreading across the galaxy." She gestured at the frozen image behind her. "We thought it was their aggression, their forward-facing predator eyes, their evolutionary history of violence and conquest. But we were wrong." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, Humans do not conquer the galaxy with warships, she said. They conquer it with the radical belief that every being, no matter how small, no matter how frightened, no matter how broken, is precious. She stepped forward, and her forearms spread wide in the Varelian gesture of profound truth. They conquer it by teaching children that they are treasures worth searching for, and that finding them is the greatest joy in the universe. And this simple lesson spreads from child to child, from species to species, until the whole galaxy learns to see each other differently. The chamber was absolutely silent now. Hundreds of delegates hanging on her every word. We thought we were studying them, Kethra said. We thought we were the advanced civilizations, and they were the newcomers who had much to learn from us. But I stand before you today to suggest that perhaps we had it backwards. She turned to look at the image of Marcus one more time, at his tear-streaked laughing face, surrounded by children who loved him. Perhaps we are the ones who should be learning from them. She faced the assembly again and delivered her final words. I recommend that the Galactic Council formally invite human child development specialists to establish training programs on every member world, so that all of our civilizations can learn what they have always known, that the way to build a better galaxy is not through power or conquest or technology, but through teaching every child of every species that they are a treasure worth finding. 1 year later, a bronze statue was unveiled at the entrance to the Chen Memorial Center for Lost Children, the largest interspecies orphanage in the galaxy. And standing beside, it was a young Varelian woman with golden fur and bright eyes who had been asked to give the dedication speech. Her name was Yura, and she was 12 years old now. And she stood straight and proud as she spoke to the gathered crowd. When I was small, she said, I thought I was nothing. I thought I was broken and worthless, and that nobody would ever want me. She looked up at the statue of Marcus Chun, who had retired from active service, but still visited the center every week to play with the children. But then a human taught me a game, she continued. A simple game about hiding and being found. And every time he found me, he called me his treasure. And he made me believe that I was precious and valuable and worth searching for. She turned back to the crowd, and her voice rang out clear and strong in the darkness. They taught us to hide, she said, but the human taught us to be found. And somewhere in the crowd, an old man with gray hair and kind eyes smiled through his tears, because his treasures had found something even more valuable than he had ever given them. They had found themselves.